The howling wind carried Emma Fowler's cries across the empty prairie as her labor pains intensified beneath the vast Nebraska sky of 1873. Abandoned by a man who had promised her the world, she clutched her swollen belly as the first drops of an approaching storm pelted her face, mingling with tears of desperation and fear. Ryan Keller never expected to find a woman in labor when he set out to round up strays that morning. The 30-year-old rancher had been tracking his missing cattle for hours when he spotted what looked like a bundle of fabric against the tall grass. Drawing closer on his chestnut gelding, he realized with shock that the bundle was actually a young woman, her face contorted in pain, her dress soaked through from the emerging storm. "Madam!" Ryan called out, dismounting quickly and rushing to her side. "Madam, can you hear me?" Katherine Frost forced her eyes open, vision blurry with pain and exhaustion. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing wind. "Please help me." Ryan assessed the situation with growing alarm. The storm was worsening by the minute, the woman was clearly in labor, and they were at least 15 miles from his ranch, even further from the nearest town. "I'm going to help you, madam," he said, removing his coat and draping it over her trembling form. "My name's Ryan Keller. I've got a ranch not far from here. Can you tell me your name?" "Katherine," she gasped between contractions. "Katherine Frost." "Miss Frost, I need to get you somewhere safe. This baby's coming, and we can't stay out here in this storm." Ryan's voice was steady despite his racing heart. He had helped deliver calves and foals, but never a human baby. Katherine nodded weakly, another contraction stealing her breath. When it passed, she managed to say, "He left me here, said he wouldn't raise another man's bastard." Ryan's jaw tightened at her words, anger flaring in his chest at the cowardice of the man who had abandoned this woman and her unborn child to the merciless Prairie. "Don't you worry about him now. I'm going to take care of you." With gentle but urgent movements, Ryan helped Katherine onto his horse, mounting behind her and cradling her against his chest. The closest shelter wasn't his ranch house, but an old trapper's cabin he knew of about 3 miles east. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The ride was agonizing for Katherine, each jolt sending waves of pain through her body. Ryan murmured reassurances, keeping one arm firmly around her as he guided his horse through the worsening storm. By the time they reached the cabin, Katherine's contractions were coming less than 2 minutes apart. The cabin was small and dusty, abandoned for years, but still sound. Ryan kicked the door open and carried Katherine inside, laying her gently on the single cot that remained. He worked quickly, lighting the old stove with supplies from his saddlebag and boiling what little water he could find. "The baby's coming," Katherine cried out, gripping the edges of the cot. "I can feel it." Ryan had never felt more out of his depth, but he didn't let it show. He'd seen enough life come into the world on his ranch to know the basics. "I'm here, Katherine. You're not alone anymore." Hours passed in a blur of pain and effort. Katherine fought with every ounce of strength she possessed, while Ryan stayed by her side, offering whatever comfort and assistance he could. Outside, the storm raged on, isolating them from the rest of the world. As dawn broke, bringing with it the first hints of clearing skies, a tiny cry pierced the cabin's silence. Ryan stared in wonder at the squirming infant in his hands, a baby girl with a shock of dark hair and her mother's determined expression. "You did it, Katherine," he said, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the baby in his clean shirt and placed her in her exhausted mother's arms. "You've got a beautiful daughter." Katherine's tears flowed freely as she gazed at her child. "Thank you," she whispered, looking up at Ryan with gratitude shining in her eyes. "I don't know how to repay you." "There's no need for that," Ryan replied, embarrassed by her gratitude. Any decent man would have done the same. But as he watched Katherine cradle her newborn, something shifted inside Ryan's heart. In that moment, he made a silent promise to this woman who had fought so bravely and to the innocent child who had come into the world under his watch that they wouldn't face the future alone. The storm had passed by mid-morning, leaving behind a washed, clean prairie and a sky of brilliant blue. Katherine slept fitfully, her baby nestled beside her, while Ryan stepped outside to assess their situation. His ranch was still half a day's ride away, and Katherine was in no condition to travel. Returning to the cabin, Ryan found Katherine awake, attempting to sit up with her baby in her arms. "You should rest," he said, hurrying to her side. "We can't stay here," Katherine replied, her voice stronger than before but still fragile. "I won't be a burden to you, Mr. Keller." "Ryan," he corrected gently, "and you're not a burden. But you're right that we can't stay here long. There's not enough supplies." He hesitated, then made a decision. "I'm going to ride to my ranch and bring back a wagon. It'll be more comfortable for you and the little one." Fear flickered across Katherine's face. "You're coming back?" The uncertainty in her voice told Ryan everything he needed to know about the kind of treatment she'd received from men. "I promise. I'll be back before sunset. You have my word." Katherine studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "All right." Ryan gathered what supplies he could leave with her: his canteen, jerky from his saddlebag, his spare blanket. "What will you name her?" he asked, nodding toward the sleeping infant. Katherine looked down at her daughter, a soft smile touching her lips. "Hope?" she said. "Her name is Hope." The name hung in the air between them, filled with meaning. Ryan nodded, unable to speak past the sudden tightness in his throat. With a final promise to return quickly, he mounted his horse and rode west toward his ranch. The miles passed beneath his horse's hooves as Ryan's mind raced ahead. His ranch wasn't large, modest compared to some in the territory, but it was prosperous enough, with a sturdy house, a good barn, and enough land to raise his cattle. He had built it all himself over the past 8 years, ever since coming west after the war, and it had always been enough until now. Now, for the first time, the thought of his empty house waiting for him felt hollow. True to his word, Ryan returned before sunset, driving a wagon with a makeshift bed of blankets and hay in the back. He had brought supplies too: food, clean water, fresh clothes that had belonged to his late mother, and even a small wooden crate lined with soft fabric that could serve as a cradle for baby Hope. Katherine's relief at seeing him was obvious, though she tried to hide it behind a mask of composure. "You came back," she said simply. "I gave my word," Ryan replied, helping her and the baby into the wagon. The journey to Ryan's ranch was slow and careful, with frequent stops to allow Katherine to nurse Hope or simply rest. As they traveled, Katherine gradually shared pieces of her story: how she had fallen in love with a man passing through her hometown in Missouri, how he had promised to marry her once they reached Oregon, and how his attitude had changed when he discovered she was carrying another man's child. "I never lied to him," Katherine said, her voice steady despite the pain the memories clearly caused her. "He knew from the beginning that Hope wasn't his. Her father was a man I'd been courting back home. When he died in a mining accident, I was already carrying his child. No one in town knew yet, and I was afraid of what they'd do when they found out." Ryan listened without judgment. He knew all too well how harsh people could be toward those who didn't fit their narrow ideas of propriety. "What was his name?" Ryan asked. "The man who left you." Katherine shook her head. "It doesn't matter now. He's gone, and I doubt he'll ever come looking for us." She looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully in her makeshift cradle. "It's just us now." "Not just you," Ryan said quietly. "You have friends now, Katherine, for as long as you need." They arrived at Ryan's ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples. The house stood on a gentle rise, a 2-story structure of solid logs with a wide porch and glass windows that caught the dying light. A barn and corral stood nearby, and beyond them, the prairie stretched toward distant hills where Ryan's cattle grazed. Katherine looked around with wide eyes as Ryan helped her down from the wagon. "Your home is beautiful," she said. "It's not much," Ryan replied, suddenly self-conscious of the rough-hewn furniture and simple decorations inside. "But it's sturdy and warm. He showed Katherine to the spare bedroom on the first floor, apologizing for its plainness. "My mother used this room before she passed last year," he explained. "I haven't had the heart to change anything." Katherine touched his arm gently. "It's perfect, Ryan. Thank you." That night, after ensuring Katherine and Hope were settled comfortably, Ryan sat on his porch watching the stars emerge in the vast Nebraska sky. He thought about the strange turn his life had taken in just 24 hours, and about the woman and child sleeping under his roof. He knew there would be talk in town when people found out. Nebraska City was still small enough that newcomers were noticed, especially unmarried women with babies and no husband in sight. But Ryan had never much cared what others thought of him, and he wasn't about to start now. As the days turned into weeks, Katherine regained her strength. She insisted on earning her keep, taking over the cooking and household tasks despite Ryan's protests that she should rest. Little Hope thrived, growing plumper and more alert by the day, her dark eyes tracking everything around her with curiosity. Ryan found himself looking forward to coming in from his day's work, drawn by the warm light in the windows and the smell of cooking that had been absent from his home for too long. He took to bringing small gifts when he went to town for supplies: a length of pretty fabric for Katherine, a tiny stuffed rabbit for Hope, seeds for the kitchen garden Katherine had started. For her part, Katherine watched Ryan with growing admiration. He was unlike any man she had known before, quiet but kind, strong but gentle, and unfailingly respectful of her boundaries. He never asked when she would leave, never implied that her presence was temporary, and she found herself hoping with increasing desperation that he wouldn't ask her to go. One evening in late summer, as they sat on the porch after supper with Hope asleep in Katherine's arms, Ryan cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he began, staring out at the darkening prairie. "Winter will be here before we know it. The house gets mighty cold, especially upstairs where my room is." Katherine's heart sank. Was this his way of telling her it was time to move on? "I thought maybe I should move my things to the small room off the kitchen," Ryan continued, still not looking at her, "and you and Hope could have the master bedroom upstairs. It's warmer, with the chimney running through the wall." Relief flooded through Katherine. "That's very kind of you, but I wouldn't want to displace you from your own room." "It's no displacement," Ryan assured her. "Truth is, I've been sleeping in the barn most nights anyway. Too many hours thinking about you two under the same roof." The admission hung between them, loaded with meaning. Katherine's cheeks flushed in the gathering darkness. "Ryan," she began carefully, "I don't want you to feel obligated to us. You've already done more than anyone could have expected." Ryan turned to face her then, his expression earnest in the fading light. "It's not obligation, Katherine. Having you and Hope here, it's made this place feel like a home again. I haven't had that since my mother passed." Katherine swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "We feel the same. But people will talk. They probably already are." "Let them," Ryan said with a shrug. Unless you're planning to move on eventually." The question he hadn't asked for weeks was finally out in the open. Katherine looked down at Hope, sleeping peacefully, then back at Ryan. "I have no plans to leave," she said softly. "Not unless you ask us to go." Ryan's relief was palpable. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay as long as you want. Forever, if it suits you." It wasn't quite a proposal, but it was a promise, and for now, that was enough for Katherine. As autumn painted the prairie in golds and russets, Katherine and Hope became fixtures in Ryan's life. The three of them fell into an easy rhythm, Ryan working the ranch with occasional help from two local boys he employed part-time, Katherine managing the household and tending to her growing garden, and little Hope charming them both with her first smiles and coos. Word of the arrangement eventually reached Nebraska City, carried by Ryan's ranch hands and the merchants he traded with. The reactions were mixed. Some neighbors, like the kindly widow Martha Jenkins who lived on the next property, accepted the situation without question, bringing preserves and offering friendship to Katherine. Others were less charitable, whispering behind their hands when Ryan rode into town with Katherine and Hope for supplies. Katherine felt the stares and heard the whispers, but she held her head high. She had endured worse judgment in her life, and the safety and happiness she had found with Ryan was worth any amount of gossip. Ryan, for his part, confronted the rumors head-on. When the local preacher, Reverend Thomas, paid a visit to the ranch with thinly veiled concern about the improper arrangement, Ryan invited him in for coffee and spoke plainly. "Miss Frost and her daughter are under my protection, Reverend," he said, his tone polite but firm. "There's nothing improper happening in this house. I sleep in the room off the kitchen, and they have the upstairs to themselves." The Reverend looked uncomfortable. "Even so, Mr. Keller, appearances matter. People talk." "Let them," Ryan replied. "I'd rather face their talk than turn away a woman and child in need." Reverend Thomas studied Ryan for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Your intentions are honorable, I can see that. But perhaps you should consider a more permanent arrangement, for the sake of propriety." Ryan's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting I should marry Miss Frost?" "It would certainly silence the gossips," the Reverend said, "and provide the child with a father's name." After the preacher left, Ryan found Katherine in the garden, digging up the last of the summer vegetables before the first frost. Hope lay nearby on a blanket, batting at a wooden mobile Ryan had carved for her. "Reverend Thomas thinks we should get married," Ryan said without preamble, dropping to his knees beside Katherine to help with the digging. Katherine's hands stilled in the soil. "Does he now?" "For propriety's sake," Ryan added, watching her face carefully. Katherine resumed digging, her movements deliberately measured. "And what did you tell him?" "That my arrangements with you were none of his business," Ryan replied, but he had a point about the gossip affecting Hope as she grows up. Katherine sat back on her heels, wiping her hands on her apron. "Ryan Keller, if that's your idea of a proposal, it leaves much to be desired." A smile tugged at the corner of Ryan's mouth. "It wasn't a proposal, not yet. When I propose to you, if that's something you might want someday, it won't be because some preacher suggested it, or because we're worried about gossip." Katherine's heart skipped a beat at the when, not if. She looked at him steadily. "Then why would it be?" "Because I'm falling in love with you, Katherine Frost," Ryan said simply, "and because I already love that little girl like she was my own." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "Ryan, you don't need to say anything now," he hurried to add. "I know it's too soon. I know you've been hurt before. I just wanted you to know where I stand." Katherine reached out and took his hand, dirt and all. "It's not too soon," she whispered. "Not when it's right." Ryan's eyes widened with hope. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying that Hope and I have found more happiness here in these few months than I ever thought possible," Katherine said, "and a large part of that is because of you." Ryan's smile broke through like sunshine. "Does that mean you'll marry me, Katherine Frost? Not for propriety, not for the gossips, but because we could build something good together?" Katherine squeezed his hand, her own smile matching his. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will." They were married 2 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. Reverend Thomas officiated, his earlier concerns apparently set aside in the face of the couple's obvious happiness. Martha Jenkins stood as Katherine's witness, while Ryan's foreman, a gruff but loyal man named Hank Miller, stood up for him. Hope, dressed in a gown Katherine had sewn from the fabric Ryan had brought her, was held by Martha throughout the brief ceremony. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Thomas declared, "Mr. and Mrs. Ryan Keller." As Ryan kissed his bride, a cheer went up from the small gathering of neighbors and hands who had been invited to witness the ceremony. Katherine felt tears of happiness well in her eyes as Ryan drew back, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," he whispered. That evening, after the guests had departed and Hope was asleep in her cradle, now moved to the small room adjacent to the master bedroom, Katherine and Ryan stood together on the porch, watching the stars appear above their land. "Are you happy?" Ryan asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever thought possible," Katherine replied honestly. "When Edward left me on the prairie, I thought my life was over. I never imagined I could find this kind of happiness." Ryan stiffened slightly beside her. "Edward?" Katherine realized she had never told Ryan the name of the man who had abandoned her. "Edward Blackburn," she said. "That was his name." Ryan was quiet for a long moment. "I know that name," he finally said. "He passed through Nebraska City about a month ago. Heard he was headed to California looking for gold." Katherine's heart beat faster. "You saw him?" "No," Ryan assured her quickly. "Just heard talk in town. He apparently made quite an impression at the saloon, bragging about his prospects." Katherine relaxed against him. "It doesn't matter now. He's in the past." Ryan turned her to face him, his expression serious. "If he ever came back, if he ever tried to claim any right to you or Hope—" Katherine placed a finger against his lips, stopping his words. "He won't. And even if he did, he has no rights. Hope isn't his child, and I was never his wife." She smiled up at Ryan. "I'm your wife now, and Hope is our daughter." Ryan's expression softened. "Our daughter," he repeated, testing the words. "I like the sound of that." That night, as husband and wife, they discovered each other with tender passion. Katherine, who had known only one man before Hope's father, found in Ryan a gentle and considerate lover who put her pleasure before his own. And Ryan, who had known only brief encounters with saloon girls in his younger days, found in Katherine a depth of intimacy he had never experienced before. "I love you," he whispered against her hair as they lay tangled together afterward. "And I love you," Katherine replied, realizing the words were true. Somewhere along the way, her gratitude and admiration had transformed into something deeper, something that felt like coming home. The winter of 1873-1874 was harsh, with blizzards sweeping across the Nebraska prairie and temperatures dropping well below freezing. But inside the Keller home, warmth prevailed. Ryan had stocked the root cellar well, ensuring they had plenty of preserved vegetables, smoked meat, and flour to last until spring. Katherine proved adept at stretching their supplies, creating hearty stews and fresh bread that filled the house with comforting aromas. Hope thrived despite the cold, growing stronger and more curious by the day. By January, she was attempting to crawl, much to her parents' delight and dismay, as they scrambled to keep her away from the fireplace and other dangers. "She's got your determination," Ryan observed one evening, as Hope doggedly pursued a wooden ball he had carved for her, refusing to give up despite repeatedly falling onto her stomach. "And your stubbornness," Katherine countered with a smile. Ryan laughed, reaching out to tug Katherine onto his lap. "I prefer to call it perseverance," he said, kissing her cheek. Their happiness wasn't without challenges. One particularly brutal blizzard in February left them snowbound for nearly 2 weeks, with Ryan making treacherous trips to the barn twice daily to care for the livestock. Katherine worried constantly during these absences, standing at the window with Hope in her arms, watching for Ryan's return through the swirling snow. "You can't keep doing this," she insisted after one such trip, helping him remove his ice-encrusted coat. "It's too dangerous." "The animals depend on me," Ryan replied, his voice hoarse from the cold. "I can't abandon them." "And we depend on you," Katherine said fiercely. "Hope and I need you to come home safe." Ryan softened at her words, drawing her and Hope into his arms. "I'll always come home to you," he promised. "Always." As winter reluctantly gave way to spring, the prairie came alive with wildflowers and new growth. Hope celebrated her first birthday in April, now walking with assistance and babbling constantly in a language only she understood. The small celebration they held, just the three of them, plus Martha Jenkins and Hank Miller, was simple but joyful. "I can hardly believe it's been a year," Katherine said as they watched Hope smash her tiny hands into the small cake Katherine had baked. "Best year of my life," Ryan replied, squeezing her hand. Spring also brought increased activity on the ranch. The cattle needed tending after the harsh winter, fences required repair, and the kitchen garden demanded attention. Katherine found herself increasingly busy managing the household while caring for an active toddler, but she thrived on the work, taking pride in their growing prosperity. One warm May morning, as Katherine was hanging laundry while Hope played nearby in a pen Ryan had built, she spotted a rider approaching from the direction of Nebraska City. Shielding her eyes against the sun, she didn't recognize the man at first, but as he drew closer, her blood ran cold. Edward Blackburn. Katherine snatched Hope from her play area and hurried inside, her heart pounding. Through the window she watched Edward approach the house, his posture confident, his clothes finer than she remembered. He had clearly found some success in the year since he had abandoned her. When he knocked on the door, Katherine took a deep breath to steady herself before answering. Hope balanced on her hip. "Katherine," Edward said, removing his hat with a flourish, "you're looking well. Motherhood suits you." "What do you want, Edward?" Katherine asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Edward's eyes moved to Hope, who regarded him with solemn curiosity. "Beautiful child," he commented. "May I come in? I believe we have things to discuss." "We have nothing to discuss," Katherine replied. "Please leave." Edward's smile tightened. "I've heard you've done well for yourself. Married a rancher, I understand. Quite the step up from being abandoned and pregnant on the prairie." Katherine flinched at his cruel reminder. "My husband will be back soon. He won't take kindly to finding you here." "Your husband," Edward repeated, his tone mocking. "Does he know about us, Katherine? Does he know you were mine before you were his?" "I was never yours," Katherine said, anger replacing her fear. "And he knows everything about my past. Now please leave." Edward took a step forward, forcing Katherine to retreat into the house. "I've had time to reconsider my hasty decision last year," he said, following her inside uninvited. "I've made my fortune in California, and I find myself wanting a wife and family. You and I had something once, Katherine." "We had nothing but your lies," Katherine replied, backing toward the kitchen where she knew Ryan kept a rifle. "You left me to die, Edward. You left me in labor on the open prairie." Edward waved a dismissive hand. "A regrettable lapse in judgment. I was young, scared of the responsibility. I'm different now." "And I'm married now," Katherine said firmly. "Happily married to a good man who would never abandon me or his child." Edward's expression darkened. "The child isn't his," he said sharply. "And you weren't married when you laid with him. You're still the same loose woman who gave herself to me without a wedding ring." The sound of a rifle being cocked cut through the tension. "I suggest you watch how you speak to my wife in our home." Ryan's voice came from the doorway, cold and dangerous. Katherine had never been so relieved to see anyone in her life. Ryan stood in the doorway, rifle aimed squarely at Edward's chest, his expression one of controlled fury. Edward turned slowly, raising his hand slightly. "No need for that, friend. Just having a conversation with an old acquaintance." "We're not friends," Ryan said evenly. "And from what I heard, this isn't a conversation my wife welcomes. I think it's time you left." Edward looked between them, assessing the situation. "The child isn't yours," he said to Ryan. "You know that, right? She was carrying another man's bastard when I met her." "Hope is my daughter in every way that matters," Ryan replied, not lowering the rifle. "And you're the man who left a pregnant woman to die on the prairie. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." Edward's face flushed with anger. "You have no right to judge me. You don't know the circumstances." "I know enough," Ryan said. "Now get off my property before I forget my manners entirely." For a moment, it seemed Edward might argue further. But something in Ryan's steady gaze must have convinced him of the danger, because he finally nodded, placing his hat back on his head. "This isn't over, Katherine," he said as he moved toward the door. "I came back for what's mine." "Nothing here belongs to you," Katherine replied, holding Hope tighter. "Goodbye, Edward." They watched from the doorway as Edward mounted his horse and rode away, his back rigid with anger. When he was out of sight, Katherine's legs finally gave way, and she sank into a chair, Hope still clutched in her arms. Ryan set aside the rifle and knelt before her, taking her free hand in his. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Katherine nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Ryan reached out to stroke Hope's hair, his touch infinitely tender. "He won't hurt either of you," he promised. "I won't let him." I was so afraid, Katherine admitted, not for myself, but for Hope. What if he tries to take her away? He has no claim to her, Ryan said firmly. She's our daughter now, legally and in every other way. Katherine looked into his eyes, seeing the fierce protection there. I love you, she whispered. I don't deserve you, but I'm so grateful for you. Ryan cupped her cheek in his hand. You deserve everything good in this world, Katherine Keller, and I intend to spend my life giving it to you. That night, after Hope was asleep, they made love with a desperate intensity born of the day's fears. Afterward, Katherine lay in Ryan's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart. What if he comes back? She asked, voicing the fear that still lingered. Then we'll face him together, Ryan replied. But I don't think he will. Men like Edward Blackburn are cowards at heart. He saw today that you're protected now, that you're not alone anymore. Katherine hoped he was right, but a shadow of worry remained. I never thought I'd see him again. When he left me that day, I truly believed he was gone forever. People have a way of turning up when you least expect them, Ryan said, his arms tightening around her. But that doesn't mean they can hurt you. You're stronger now, Katherine. We're stronger together. Despite Ryan's reassurances, Katherine insisted on learning to shoot in the days that followed. Ryan taught her patiently, guiding her hands on his rifle until she could consistently hit targets at varying distances. I hope you never need to use this, he said as they walked back from their makeshift shooting range one afternoon. But I sleep better, knowing you can protect yourself and Hope if needed. Katherine tucked the rifle back into its place by the door. So do I. As spring gave way to summer, there was no further sign of Edward. Life on the ranch continued, with Ryan's cattle herd growing and Katherine's garden flourishing. Hope took her first unassisted steps in June, tottering across the kitchen floor to Ryan's outstretched arms while Katherine watched, tears of joy in her eyes. She's going to be running before we know it, Ryan predicted, swinging Hope into the air as she giggled with delight. Heaven help us then, Katherine laughed. In July, Katherine realized her monthly courses were late. After a week passed with no sign, she confided her suspicions to Martha Jenkins during the older woman's weekly visit. Wouldn't surprise me a bit, Martha said with a knowing smile. The way that husband of yours looks at you, it's a wonder it didn't happen sooner. Katherine blushed, but smiled. How will I know for certain? Time will tell, Martha advised, but the sickness in the morning is usually the first sure sign. That and your breasts getting tender. 2 more weeks passed before Katherine was certain enough to tell Ryan. She waited until Hope was asleep, and they were sitting together on the porch, watching fireflies dance over the summer brown prairie. I have something to tell you, she began, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. Ryan turned to her, his expression curious. What is it, love? I'm carrying your child, Katherine said, her hand moving instinctively to her still flat stomach. Our baby should arrive sometime next winter. Ryan stared at her for a moment, then let out a whoop of joy so loud that a nesting bird took flight from a nearby tree. He gathered Katherine into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. A baby, he said when he finally set her down, his voice filled with wonder. Our baby. Katherine laughed, lightheaded from his enthusiastic reaction. You're happy then? Happy doesn't begin to cover it, Ryan said, dropping to his knees to place his hands on her belly. Hello in there, little one. Your pa can't wait to meet you. Katherine ran her fingers through his hair, her heart so full of love it felt it might burst. I was worried you might think it was too soon, with Hope still so young. Ryan looked up at her, his expression serious. Katherine, nothing would make me happier than filling this house with children, our children. Hope is going to be the best big sister any baby could ask for. The idea of Hope as a big sister made Katherine smile. She will, won't she? As summer turned to fall, Katherine's pregnancy progressed smoothly. Unlike with Hope, where she had been alone and terrified for much of the time, this pregnancy was marked by Ryan's constant attention and care. He insisted she rest when she was tired, brought her ginger tea when morning sickness struck, and talked to her growing belly each night, telling the baby stories about the ranch and promises about the future. Hope, now 18 months old and chattering in an increasingly comprehensible mix of words and babble, didn't quite understand what was happening, but seemed to sense the excitement in the house. She had taken to patting Catherine's belly and saying, "Baby," with a solemn expression that made her parents laugh. In October, as Katherine entered her 5th month of pregnancy, Ryan rode into Nebraska City to order supplies for the coming winter. While there, he heard troubling news at the general store. "Edward Blackburn's been asking questions about you and your wife," the storekeeper Jim Wilson told him as he filled Ryan's order. "Been hanging around the saloon for the past few days, talking big about some claim he has on your property." Ryan's jaw tightened. "What kind of claim?" Jim shrugged. "Couldn't say for certain, but he's been drinking heavy and making threats. Thought you should know." "Thanks, Jim," Ryan said, paying for his supplies. "I appreciate the warning." On the ride home, Ryan's mind raced with concern. What could Edward possibly claim? The ranch had been Ryan's for years, with all the proper documentation filed with the land office, and any claim he might try to make on Katherine or Hope would be legally baseless. Katherine was Ryan's lawfully wedded wife, and Hope was now legally his daughter, as he had formally adopted her shortly after the wedding. When he reached the ranch, Ryan found Katherine and Hope in the garden, harvesting the last of the fall vegetables before the first frost. The sight of them, Katherine with her rounded belly, Hope toddling beside her with a tiny basket, filled him with fierce protectiveness. "You're back early," Katherine said with a smile that faded when she saw his expression. "What's wrong?" Ryan hesitated, not wanting to worry her, especially in her condition, but they had promised always to be honest with each other. "Edward Blackburn is back in Nebraska City," he said. "He's been asking questions about us." Katherine's hand went instinctively to her belly, her face paling. "What does he want?" "I don't know for certain," Ryan admitted, "but Jim Wilson says he's been talking about some kind of claim on our property." "That's ridiculous," Katherine said. "He has no claim here." Ryan helped her to her feet, taking Hope's basket and lifting the child onto his hip. "I know that, but desperate men can convince themselves of all sorts of things." That evening, after Hope was asleep, they discussed what to do. Katherine was adamant that they shouldn't allow Edward to disrupt their lives. "We can't live in fear of him," she insisted. "This is our home, our life." "I agree," Ryan said, pacing the kitchen, "but we need to be prepared. I think I should ride into town tomorrow and speak with Sheriff Davis, make him aware of the situation." Katherine nodded. "That's wise. And perhaps you should speak with Mr. Bennett as well." Jonathan Bennett was the lawyer who had handled Hope's adoption and other legal matters for the ranch. Before Ryan could respond, the sound of approaching horses broke the night silence. Ryan moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "3 riders," he reported, his voice tense. "Coming fast." Katherine's heart raced. "Edward?" "Could be," Ryan said, reaching for his rifle. "Stay inside with Hope. Lock the door behind me." "Ryan, no." "Katherine, please," Ryan cut her off, his expression pleading. "I need to know you and Hope are safe." Reluctantly, Katherine nodded. Ryan kissed her quickly, then stepped outside, rifle in hand. As instructed, Katherine locked the door behind him, then hurried to Hope's room, gathering the sleeping child into her arms and retreating to the master bedroom where Ryan kept a revolver in the bedside drawer. Outside, Ryan stood on the porch, watching as the riders approached. In the moonlight, he recognized Edward Blackburn in the lead, flanked by 2 rough-looking men Ryan didn't know. "That's far enough," Ryan called as they reached the yard, raising his rifle. "State your business." Edward reined in his horse, the other 2 men following suit. "Evening, Keller," he called, his words slightly slurred. "Just came for a friendly chat." "It's late for visiting," Ryan replied evenly, "and you're not welcome here." Edward dismounted, swaying slightly as his feet hit the ground. His companions remained on horseback, their hands suspiciously close to their holstered guns. "That's not very neighborly," Edward said, taking an unsteady step forward. especially when I've come to discuss a business proposition." "We have no business to discuss," Ryan said, not lowering his rifle. "I suggest you leave while you still can." Edward's face hardened. "The woman in there was mine first," he said, pointing unsteadily toward the house. "She was carrying my child when you took her in." "That's a lie," Ryan said coldly. "Hope isn't your child, and Katherine was never yours. You abandoned her on the prairie to die." "A misunderstanding," Edward insisted. "But I'm willing to be reasonable. $500 for any claim she thinks she has on you or this property, and I'll disappear for good." Ryan's finger tightened on the trigger. "Get off my land," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "Now." Edward stared at him for a long moment, then smiled unpleasantly. "You know, accidents happen all the time on these isolated ranches. Fires, stampedes, men falling from horses and breaking their necks. Would be a shame if your pretty wife found herself widowed." Before Ryan could respond, the front door opened behind him. "That's enough, Edward," Katherine's voice rang out, strong and clear. Ryan turned, alarmed to see Katherine standing in the doorway, his revolver steady in her hand. "Katherine, get back inside," he urged. "No," she said, stepping forward to stand beside him. "I won't hide from him anymore." Edward's eyes widened at the sight of her, taking in her pregnancy. "Well, well," he said. "Looks like you've been busy, Katherine." "This is my husband's child," Katherine said, her voice cold. "Just as Hope is his daughter now. You have no claims here. Edward, not on me, not on Hope, not on this land." "The law might see things differently," Edward insisted. "I have rights." "You have nothing," Katherine cut him off. "You abandoned me. You left me to die. Any rights you might have claimed were forfeit that day." One of Edward's companions shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Blackburn, you didn't say nothing about leaving no woman to die," he muttered. "This ain't what you told us." "Shut up, Cole," Edward snapped. The damage was done, however. The second man was also looking at Edward with newfound suspicion. "You said this was about reclaiming stolen property," he said. "Didn't say nothing about threatening no pregnant woman." Katherine seized the moment of discord. "Edward has lied to you, just as he's lied to everyone else. There's nothing for him here except the consequences of his actions." Edward's face contorted with rage. "You ungrateful whore!" he spat, taking a step toward Katherine. "After everything I did for you." The sound of Ryan's rifle being fired into the air cut him off. "That's your last warning," Ryan said, his voice deadly quiet as he leveled the rifle at Edward's chest. "One more step, one more word against my wife, and I won't aim for the sky." For a tense moment, no one moved. Then the man called Cole backed his horse away. "I'm out, Blackburn," he announced. "This ain't right." The second man followed suit. "Me too. Find someone else for your dirty work." Edward watched helplessly as his hired men rode away, leaving him alone to face Ryan and Katherine. "It's over, Edward," Katherine said. "Whatever scheme you had in mind, whatever lies you were planning to tell, it's finished. Leave us in peace, or next time, I'll be the one pulling the trigger." Edward looked between them, his eyes narrowing as he calculated his odds. Finally, he backed toward his horse, his movements clumsy with drink and fear. "This isn't over," he muttered as he mounted. "You'll regret this." "The only thing I regret is ever believing you were a man of honor," Katherine replied. They watched as Edward rode away, his figure growing smaller against the moonlit prairie until he disappeared into the darkness. Only then did Katherine's composure crumble. She sagged against Ryan, the revolver dropping from her suddenly trembling hand. "Oh, God," she whispered. "I was so scared." Ryan gathered her close, his heart pounding with relief and lingering adrenaline. "You were magnificent," he murmured into her hair. "So brave." "I couldn't let him threaten you," Katherine said. "I couldn't hide while you faced him alone." Ryan led her gently back into the house, securing the door behind them. "Is Hope still sleeping?" he asked. Katherine nodded. She didn't wake, thank goodness. They checked on their daughter together, finding her still peacefully asleep in the master bedroom, unaware of the drama that had unfolded. Katherine smoothed a hand over Hope's dark curls, tears welling in her eyes. "What if he comes back?" she asked quietly as they retreated to the hallway. "We'll ride into town first thing tomorrow," Ryan decided. "Speak with the sheriff. Get a restraining order if needed. Edward Blackburn won't threaten our family again." But Edward Blackburn never returned to threaten the Keller family. 2 days later, Sheriff Davis brought news that Edward had been found dead in a ravine about 5 miles outside of town, his neck broken from an apparent fall from his horse while riding drunk. "Can't say I'm sorry to tell you," the sheriff admitted as he sat at their kitchen table, accepting a cup of coffee from Katherine. "From what I gather, he wasn't much of a man." "No," Katherine agreed quietly. "He wasn't." After the sheriff left, Ryan found Katherine in Hope's room, watching their daughter play with her wooden toys. "Are you all right?" he asked, slipping an arm around her waist. Katherine leaned into him, considering the question. "I feel relieved," she admitted, and then guilty for feeling relieved. "You have nothing to feel guilty about," Ryan assured her. "Edward made his own choices, right up to the end." Katherine nodded, her hand moving to her growing belly. "It's strange to think that our child will never have to worry about him appearing, that Hope will never have to face his claims or threats. They'll grow up knowing only love and safety," Ryan promised. "That's what matters now." As winter settled over the prairie, the Keller family turned inward, focused on preparing for the new baby's arrival. Ryan added a second crib to the nursery adjacent to the master bedroom, while Katherine sewed tiny clothes and blankets in the evenings as Hope played at her feet. Martha Jenkins became a frequent visitor, bringing advice and friendship that Katherine treasured. The older woman had become something of a surrogate mother to Katherine, filling a void she had felt since leaving her own family behind in Missouri. "You've built something beautiful here," Martha observed one afternoon as she helped Katherine organize the baby's things. "Not just the ranch, but this family." Katherine smiled, watching as Hope showed Ryan a drawing she had made, the little girl chattering excitedly while her father listened with exaggerated interest. "I never imagined I could be this happy," Katherine admitted. "When I found myself alone on the prairie that day, I thought my life was over. Instead, it was just beginning." The baby arrived in early February during a rare break in the winter storms. Katherine's labor was shorter than it had been with Hope, but no less intense. Ryan stayed by her side throughout, holding her hand and offering encouragement while Martha Jenkins acted as midwife. "One more push, my dear," Martha urged as dawn broke over the snow-covered prairie. "The baby's almost here." With a final exhausted effort, Katherine brought their child into the world, a robust boy with a shock of dark hair and a lusty cry that immediately filled the room. "A son," Ryan said, his voice thick with emotion, as Martha placed the swaddled infant in his arms. "Katherine, we have a son." Katherine reached out, tears streaming down her face as Ryan carefully transferred their baby boy to her embrace. "He's perfect," she whispered, counting tiny fingers and toes. "What shall we name him?" Ryan asked, sitting on the edge of the bed and gazing in wonder at his wife and newborn son. Katherine looked up at him, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain all the love she felt. "Robert," she said, "after your father." Ryan's eyes filled with tears. "Robert Ryan Keller," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "It's a good, strong name." Later that morning, they introduced Hope to her baby brother. The 2-year-old approached the cradle cautiously, her dark eyes wide with curiosity. "Baby," she said, pointing at the swaddled infant. "Yes, sweetheart," Katherine confirmed from where she rested in bed. "This is your brother, Robert." Hope considered this information seriously. "My baby?" she asked. Ryan chuckled, lifting Hope so she could see better. "He's your baby brother," he explained. "You're his big sister now. That means you'll help take care of him and teach him things as he grows." Hope seemed to accept this responsibility with great solemnity, reaching out one small finger to touch Robert's cheek. "Hi, baby," she said softly. Katherine and Ryan exchanged glances over their children's heads, their eyes communicating what words couldn't, the profound joy and gratitude they felt for the family they had built together. Spring came early that year, bringing with it new growth and possibilities. Robert thrived, a contented baby who rarely cried and smiled readily at his family. Hope took her role as big sister seriously, bringing her toys to show Robert and patting his head with careful gentleness. As the prairie bloomed with wildflowers, Ryan and Katherine celebrated their second wedding anniversary with a picnic on the rise behind their house, the children playing on a blanket beside them. "Do you ever think about that day?" Ryan asked as they watched Hope showing Robert a dandelion. "The day I found you?" Katherine nodded, her gaze softening with memory. "Often. How could I not? It was the day everything changed." Ryan reached for her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if I hadn't decided to track those strays that morning. If I'd gone south instead of east." "But you did go east," Katherine said, squeezing his hand. "And you did find us. I've stopped questioning the why of it, Ryan. Some things are just meant to be." Ryan looked at their children, the dark-haired girl who had come into the world during a prairie storm, and the boy born in the depths of winter, and then back at the woman who had transformed his life. "I used to think this land was all I needed," he said quietly, "that if I worked hard enough, built something lasting, it would be enough. I never knew how empty it all was until you filled it with love." Katherine leaned against his shoulder, her heart full. "And I never knew how strong I could be until you believed in me," she replied. "We saved each other, I think." As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, Ryan stood and helped Katherine to her feet. Together, they gathered their children and walked hand in hand back to the house that had become so much more than just a shelter. It had become a home, filled with the love and laughter of the family they had built together. Hope ran ahead, her dark curls bouncing in the evening light, while Robert dozed against Ryan's shoulder. Katherine watched them, her husband and children silhouetted against the setting sun, and thought about the journey that had brought them here. From the depths of despair on that stormy prairie day to the heights of joy in this moment, her life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. What had seemed like an ending had been only a beginning, the first chapter in a story still unfolding with each passing day. "Come on, Hope," Ryan called as they reached the porch. "Time to wash up for supper." "Coming." "Papa," Hope replied, racing back to take Katherine's outstretched hand. Together, the Keller family stepped into their home, closing the door against the gathering dusk secure in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them as they had faced everything else. Together, with love as their foundation and hope as their guide.